Professor Uyangoda, thank you very much for joining amid your busy schedule. Sri Lanka is facing unprecedented crisis right now, a political crisis. Since you are a specialist in this political science, I would like to ask you. Now there are talks about now the formal resignation of the president has been handed over to the speaker. What will be the next step? Now there are talks about forming an interim government. The government, how that government should be done within the opposition parties, or it is a all parties government, how it should be done and how long it should go on.
You say interim government, if it is an all-party government, at least a maximum number of political parties, if not all parties, should be there in the government. I'm not sure all parties will join. Sometimes some parties might not want to join. So that's what I said, the majority of opposition, or rather opposition and government parties, will have to join together to form a government. How long it will take? Usually these type of governments are interim measures. These are not permanent measures. Interim means for a limited period of time. Sometimes maybe as the parties agree for a period of 6 months. So they have a specific mandate and a specific agenda. It has to be a short-term agenda. So the parties which form the government will have to agree on what that agenda should be.
Now, Professor, we all know that Sri Lanka is in a deep economic crisis, now plunged into a deep political crisis. To come out from this crisis, what should be the basic steps that this new government should take immediately?
You see, there are a number of things. At the political level, the new government will have to de-escalate the political tension in the country in order to manage the crisis. So that requires not only the resignation of the president, but also the resignation of the Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. There is a lot of concern in the country, and most of the opposition parties do not want Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe to continue as the Prime Minister on the argument that he doesn't have legitimacy. He doesn't have any, he was not elected by the people. And actually, he has also turned himself into a supporter and protector of the Rajapaksa interests. So it's a very unusual situation, but he's the chief protector of the Rajapaksa interests, according to the opposition criticism. So I think he lacks legitimacy as well as credibility because of that. So he has to resign and let Parliament elect a new Prime Minister.
As we talk about, we are facing an unprecedented situation, that when talking about legitimacy, the previous president who just submitted the resignation has got 6.9 million votes, which was really unprecedented number of votes. He has, when it comes to votes, he has that votes, but the situation in the country demanded his resignation. So now, even though Ranil Wickremesinghe's party got less than 30,000 votes during the last general election, is it the time to go beyond the electoral politics to sort out the current economic crisis right now?
But you earlier asked me about the economic crisis. I think one of the first things any government will have to do is that Sri Lankan government, about a few weeks ago, went before the International Monetary Fund seeking its assistance. Negotiations have begun. So there has to be a staff level agreement initially, and then there has to be a program of action worked out between Sri Lankan economic, officials, treasury, and the central bank and the IMF. That requires political backing. Sri Lanka has to have a prime minister, a president, and a finance minister. There has to be some stable government in Colombo, which has popular support as well as legitimacy. That's what the IMF would be looking for, and also international creditors. So then after that, there has to be a team appointed by the new government to continue the talks with the IMF and later on with the Sri Lankan creditors, because there are a lot of private creditors. Sri Lanka has defaulted the payment. It has to be negotiated with them. So some kind of a stable government with popular legitimacy and international acceptance has to be in place. That is very important. But at the same time, I want to say that by going to the IMF alone will not resolve Sri Lanka's economic crisis due to two reasons. One is that IMF won't give Sri Lanka money to come out of the debt crisis. It can only facilitate the process for Sri Lanka first to reschedule the debt payments with the private creditors and have a multi-year program to come out with this debt crisis. Secondly, the IMF as a condition, as a set of conditions for its assistance, will impose certain prerequisites for the government. They will say that the government should cut down on public expenditure. They should try to balance the budget. They will say that the tax has to be new. There has to be a new tax policy so that both indirect taxes, particularly, and direct taxes should be increased. And also the IMF will say that the public sector employment should be reduced. There will be scaling down of the size of the public sector. All these will have very, very costly social consequences, because Sri Lanka has a extremely serious social crisis, which no one talks about. There has been, during the past 2 years, several waves of poverty spreading in Sri Lanka. People have lost jobs, employment, sources of income, and not only the economic crisis has caused a severe social crisis. That is why there is so much, agitation in the country. That's why so many people, thousands and thousands of people have joined the, so-called Aragale uprising also because of this social crisis. So the IMF package is likely to exacerbate the social crisis.
Yeah.
And that will in turn, sharpen the political crisis in the country. So we have an extremely difficult crisis to handle. So I don't think interim government, no interim government can really do anything except taking few initial steps. And there has to be a permanent government in Colombo after parliamentary elections, after perhaps to elect a new president, either presidential elections or parliament can elect a president, but the parliament has also lost legitimacy. This parliament was elected not for democracy but for a very authoritarian, autocratic ruler to be elected. So that parliament cannot bring democracy back. So Sri Lanka needs a new parliament for another reason. You see, the public opinion has changed drastically. It is no longer what was there in 2019. So the present parliament in Sri Lanka, with the near two-thirds majority for the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, does not reflect or represent the true public opinion in the country and political equilibrium. So a new parliament has to be elected in order for the parliament to be able to represent and reflect the actual political equilibrium existing in the country, as well as public opinion.
Professor, as you said, now the present government, whoever going to come to the form a new government, they should take unpopular decisions in the coming to pacify the IMF to go ahead with their project. But now, if any government come to power with the present economic situation, they will go unpopular within a couple of months time, which means every time the population opinion changes, they have to go back to elections. Or what is the way out if that happens?
I think there is a way out. You see, Sri Lanka's new government, with its interim government or a new government after the parliament elections, will have to seriously negotiate with the IMF for a reform package that will not pass the burden of economic recovery on the poor and the middle classes. So the problem with Sri Lanka's, economic policy making bureaucracy for many, many years, that they would not negotiate with the IMF or World Bank. They would merely accept, the conditions and, packages that the World Bank or IMF would offer. You know, now
So
that
beggars
bad
can't be
economic
choosers,
governance,
Professor.
no, that has to be changed. Sorry?
Beggars can't be choosers. No, that is the popular opinion.
No, 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 that's wrong. That's wrong. IMF would like Sri Lankan economic delegation to negotiate with them. Because the former IMF representative in Colombo told me personally several years ago, he said that it's such a pathetic situation when you meet Sri Lanka's delegation who come before the IMF because they don't negotiate. They don't have a counter argument. So it has to be changed. That's why new government has to adopt a new approach with the World Bank, with the IMF in this particular case, to argue that passing the economic burden of recovery on the poor and the middle classes by imposing indirect taxes, more indirect taxes, will actually, make the situation, the crisis worse. So they have a case here. So they have to prepare a good case to negotiate with the IMF and have a policy package that will protect the poor and the middle classes from further economic collapse. You see, Sri Lanka's poor and the middle classes can't pay any more indirect taxes. Look at the rising inflation. People don't have, even people who have fixed income, the real value of their income has dramatically gone down. So you can't, pass any more burden in terms of indirect taxes or loss of employment to these people, already affected people. So Sri Lanka has a very good humanitarian, reason to have negotiations with the IMF and devise a creative policy framework that will be sustainable, that will be accepted to the people as well. So far, none of the economic packages that Sri Lankan governments had negotiated, either with the IMF or with the World Bank, depend or rather defined in terms of thinking about how the people will be affected. No? So you have to think about those things now. So we have to have an entirely new, radically new approach to economic recovery programs. So new government will have to think about those things as well. So otherwise, that's the only way to prevent a humanitarian crisis, right? So Sri Lanka delegation has to be a strong delegation. There has to be a team of strong economists. There has to be a strong political leadership in the form of a finance minister, right? Who can say that, don't allow a further worsening of Sri Lanka's already bad humanitarian situation.
Professor, even though significant number of people calling for the resignation of Ranil Wickremesinghe, there are sizable number of people think at this present juncture, a person like Ranil Wickremesinghe should be there to navigate Sri Lanka to come out from this economic crisis. Like, what is the role, even if he is not a president or prime minister in the near future, what should be the role for him? Because in among the people, although they want him out, but there's also a kind of a consensus that we don't have much knowledgeable leaders when it comes to economy and geopolitics. So what should be the role a person like Ranil Wickremesinghe should play?
I think that's a big myth about Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. You know, that mythology, lot of people believe in. That's also built by the media, and he himself built that mythology in favor of him. In the opposition, there are economists, but the problem with opposition economists also, I don't think they will negotiate on their own with the IMF. Sri Lanka's, professional economists don't have a tradition
Mhm.
and skills to challenge the IMF and World Bank, because they have been trained in basically in that school of economics, school of monetary economics, neoclassical economics.
Okay.
So we have a situation where even the opposition economists are basically mainstream economists who will accept the IMF package without major revision. So that is why a political leadership, a finance minister, has to be a person who may not be an economist, but who would be able to give political directions for the economic policymakers in Sri Lanka.
Professor, my last question, that Aragalaya, the people, the protesters, not only calling for the resignation of Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Ranil Wickremesinghe, they call for a system change. In order to system change happen in this country, what are the political reforms that should happen in this country?
But when you analyze what they mean by system change, I think there are three levels of change that they seem to emphasize. One is that political system as a whole, that we have a very authoritarian, leader-centric political system, which is not accountable to the people, which is totally alienated from the people. It is run by an elite, political and bureaucratic elite. They say that no, that's not suitable for Sri Lanka. There has to be more people-oriented political system, with a more democracy, in other words. Secondly, at the level of governance, Sri Lanka have a very undemocratic, unaccountable, and corrupt system of governance. That has to come to an end, at the governance level. Then the state, Sri Lankan state is a single and majoritarian state. Minorities are treated as second-class citizens. There's no power sharing arrangement. So it's a single communalist, single and majoritarian state. It has to be altered too. There has to be, power sharing arrangements with the minorities, and every citizen should be treated equally. So this system change is, that's the word that Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa also used when he came into power, but he used that concept in a very narrow managerial sense, about the decision making. For example, how an office should make its decision and do implementation. That's why he visited a lot of government offices soon after he became the president and told them, this is how you do, this is how you attend to people's complaints. So that's the system change at a very micro level. But the kind of system change that Aragalaya people are talking about is more macro level. The political system as a whole, system of governance as a whole, and also at the third level is the level of democracy. You may have heard even very recently that they are extremely critical of Sri Lanka's existing system of representative democracy, right? Say parliament, political parties, they are so alienated from the people. It's run by a corrupt, system. Actually, whole democratic system is corrupt. Election process is distorted, and elected representatives do not represent the mandate given by the people. They want to change that. They want to actually address all these weaknesses, shortcomings in the representative democracy by two means. One is to address the shortcomings of Sri Lanka's existing system of representative democracy. Second one they are proposing is to bring in elements of direct democracy and popular sovereignty to the democratic process. So they want to combine representative democracy with direct democracy. That requires a constitutional change and also very innovative constitutionalist thinking. Sri Lanka's problem with constitution making is many of them do not think in terms of identifying this crisis of representative democracy. So Aragale is highlighting, I don't think they use the word crisis of representative democracy, but when I listen to their speeches, I can see that they have identified that Sri Lanka's representative democracy, Sri Lankan system is in deep crisis. So system change also involves restoration of the public confidence, public faith in representative democracy by bringing in through the system of representative democracy some of the key features of direct democracy.
Professor, the ongoing Aragale struggle, whenever the struggle happens in the recent time, people feared about anarchy going to prevail if this situation goes further. So, what is the thin line between an Aragale struggle and an anarchy situation? Where these protesters should draw a line? What are their limits? How should they progress?
I think I was watching television news today, and there were some social media, news stories also. And the Aragale people have understood that they are taking steps gradually to prevent that kind of, situation, lawlessness, not anarchy. Actually, even Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa introduced a lot of anarchy to the country. No? So, but the Saragale people are conscious of it and aware of it. They want to take, preventive measures to create, to prevent a kind of a situation of lawlessness. What is meant by anarchy is that lawlessness from emerging. So let's wait and see how it works.
Thank you very much, Professor, amid your busy schedule, for giving me this precious time. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Arul, for allowing me to share my thoughts with you and your listeners.
Thank you.
Thanks.